Is independence truly independent when the strings of power still linger, pulling the strings of economies and dictating the fate of nations? This question resonates deeply within the hearts of many African countries that once found themselves under the yoke of French colonial rule. The struggle for independence was not just a fight for political sovereignty, but also a battle for economic freedom and cultural identity. Yet even after the flags of freedom were raised, the invisible strings of influence continued to manipulate the destinies of these nations. For many former French colonies in Africa, the answer is a resounding no. The remnants of colonialism are not just historical footnotes, but living realities that shape the present and future. The architecture, the language, the very systems of governance and education bear the indelible marks of French influence. This pervasive presence raises the question, can true independence ever be achieved when the foundational structures remain so deeply intertwined with the colonial past? Decades after the flags of freedom were hoisted, the shadow of French influence still looms large, a stark reminder that true liberation goes beyond mere political gestures. It requires a dismantling of the economic and social frameworks that were designed to benefit the colonizers. The lowering of the French flag and the raising of the African one was symbolic, but the real work of decolonization is far more complex and ongoing. It involves reclaiming not just land, but also the narrative, the resources, and the future. The legacy of colonialism endures, deeply etched in the economic structures and power dynamics that continue to shape the African continent. Old treaties and agreements, often signed under duress or unequal terms, still hold sway over modern economies. French businesses continue to dominate key sectors, and even the currency used in many former colonies bears the marks of this historical relationship. This economic entanglement makes it difficult for these nations to chart an independent course. This isn't just about history, it's about the present and the future. The young generation of Africans, educated in modern classrooms and eager to innovate, often find themselves constrained by an economic system that does not fully support their ambitions. Entrepreneurs and business leaders face numerous challenges, from limited access to capital to markets that are skewed in favor of foreign interests. The struggle for true independence is ongoing, and it requires a concerted effort to break free from these historical chains. It's about resources siphoned away, economies held back, and futures mortgaged to a past they never chose. The exploitation of natural resources, from oil to minerals, continues to benefit foreign companies more than the local populations. Environmental degradation and economic disparity are the visible scars of this ongoing exploitation. The wealth generated from these resources often flows out of the continent, leaving behind a legacy of poverty and underdevelopment. This is the story of neocolonialism, where the chains may be invisible, but the grip is all too real. Neocolonialism operates through economic means, political pressure, and cultural dominance. It is a more insidious form of control, harder to see, but just as effective in maintaining the status quo. The breaking of these chains requires not just political will, but also economic innovation, cultural renaissance, and a reimagining of what true independence looks like. This second episode of Neocolonialism Exposed delves into the intricate web woven by France in its former African colonies. We will explore the historical context that set the stage for modern-day neocolonialism, examining the treaties, agreements, and policies that have perpetuated this unequal relationship. Through interviews with historians, economists, and political analysts, we will uncover the mechanisms that keep these nations tethered to their colonial past. We'll journey through the corridors of power, expose the mechanisms of economic control, and amplify the voices of those fighting for genuine economic emancipation. Activists, economists, and political leaders are at the forefront of this struggle, advocating for policies that promote true economic independence and social justice. Their stories and insights will shed light on the path forward, offering hope and inspiration for a future where Africa can truly be free. The tendrils of French influence reach deep into the African soil, often wrapped tightly around the most valuable assets, natural resources. This influence is not a recent phenomenon, but a continuation of a historical relationship that dates back to the colonial era. The extraction of resources such as oil, uranium, and precious minerals has been a cornerstone of this relationship, with French companies playing a dominant role. French multinational corporations, giants like Total Energies, Orano, and Bolloré, operate with an almost colonial-era sense of entitlement. These corporations have established a strong foothold in various African countries, leveraging their economic power to secure favorable terms and conditions. Their operations span across multiple sectors, including energy, mining, and logistics, making them indispensable players in the African economy. Their presence is pervasive, from the oil fields of Nigeria to the uranium mines of Niger, extracting vast wealth that often bypasses local communities. The wealth generated from these resources rarely trickles down to the local population, leading to a stark contrast between the rich natural resources and the impoverished communities living nearby. This disparity is a glaring example of the unequal distribution of wealth and benefits. These corporations, often backed by the French government, secure lucrative contracts, exploit lax environmental regulations, and repatriate profits back to France. The support from the French government provides these corporations with a significant advantage, allowing them to navigate the complex political and economic landscapes of African countries with relative ease. This backing also enables them to sidestep stringent environmental regulations, leading to severe ecological damage in the regions where they operate. Global Witness, an international NGO, has documented numerous cases of corruption and environmental devastation linked to French multinationals operating in Africa. Their reports highlight the unethical practices employed by these corporations, including bribery, manipulation of local laws, and exploitation of vulnerable communities. These practices not only harm the environment, but also undermine the social and economic fabric of the affected regions. Their reports paint a damning picture of exploitation, where profits are prioritized over people and the environment. The environmental degradation caused by mining and other extractive activities has led to the loss of livelihoods for many local communities. The health impacts of pollution and the destruction of natural habitats further exacerbate the suffering of these communities, creating a cycle of poverty and dependency. But this isn't just about corporate greed, it's about a deeply entrenched system that perpetuates inequality and exploitation. The influence of French multinationals extends beyond the economic sphere, affecting the political and social dynamics of the countries they operate in. This influence often manifests in the form of lobbying, political donations, and other means of exerting control over local governments and institutions. It's about a system designed to benefit France at the expense of African nations. The economic policies and trade agreements between France and African countries are often skewed in favor of French interests, leaving African nations with little room to negotiate better terms. This imbalance of power ensures that the wealth generated from African resources continues to flow into French coffers, while the local populations remain impoverished. It's about perpetuating a cycle of dependency where African economies remain tethered to the whims of French corporations and the Parisian elite. This dependency is maintained through a combination of economic leverage, political influence, and social control. The result is a system that benefits a select few at the expense of the many, perpetuating a legacy of exploitation and inequality that dates back to the colonial era. The numbers tell a stark story. They reveal a pattern of wealth extraction that has persisted for decades, if not centuries. This is not just a tale of economic transactions, it's a narrative of systemic exploitation and inequality. Each year, billions of dollars worth of resources flow out of Africa, extracted by foreign companies, including many from France. These resources range from precious minerals like gold and diamonds to essential commodities like oil and gas. The sheer volume of these extractions is staggering, and yet the wealth generated rarely benefits the local populations. Yet, the development on the ground often fails to match the scale of extraction. Despite the immense natural wealth, many African countries struggle with underdevelopment. The schools are often in disrepair, lacking basic supplies and adequate facilities. Hospitals are similarly underfunded, with outdated equipment and insufficient medical staff. Schools and hospitals remain underfunded, infrastructure crumbles, and poverty persists. The disparity between the wealth extracted and the living conditions of the people is glaring. Children are crammed into overcrowded classrooms, and patients wait for hours in clinics that lack even the most basic medical supplies. Le Monde Diplomatique, a respected French publication, has analyzed trade data between France and its former colonies. Their investigative reports shed light on the economic relationships that continue to bind these nations in a cycle of dependency and exploitation. Their findings reveal a deeply unequal relationship. The trade imbalances are stark, with African nations exporting raw materials at low prices, only to import finished goods from France at much higher costs. This creates a lopsided economic dynamic that favors the former colonial powers. African nations export raw materials at low prices, only to import finished goods from France at much higher costs. This unequal exchange of value keeps African economies trapped in a cycle of dependency, unable to fully leverage their own resources for development. The raw materials that leave African shores return as expensive luxury goods, accessible only to a wealthy few. This unequal exchange of value keeps African economies trapped in a cycle of dependency, unable to fully leverage their own resources for development. Economists argue that this system perpetuates underdevelopment, as the profits from raw materials are not reinvested into local economies, but are instead funneled back to foreign corporations and their shareholders. The question arises, where is the wealth generated from Africa's resources going? The answer is evident in the stark contrast between the opulent headquarters of French corporations and the impoverished villages in Africa. The wealth is siphoned off to enrich a select few, leaving the majority to grapple with poverty and underdevelopment. While French corporations and shareholders reap the benefits, many African nations struggle to break free from the chains of neocolonialism. Protests and movements against foreign exploitation are common, yet the systemic nature of this economic model makes change difficult. The power dynamics are heavily skewed in favor of the corporations and the nations they hail from. The wealth extracted from their land doesn't translate into improved living standards for the majority of their people. Instead, it funds lavish lifestyles and luxurious estates far removed from the realities of those who toil to extract these resources. The cycle of extraction and exploitation continues, raising urgent questions about the future of these nations and the ethical responsibilities of those who profit from their resources.